2,300,000. That's the number of blocks it took to build the Great Pyramid of Giza. 2.5 tons. That is the size of the average block, which is equivalent to basically a little bit over the weight of an SUV. 47. That's how high the Great Pyramid of Giza is, equivalent to a 47-story building. And 20. 20 is a number of years that supposedly the Great Pyramid of Giza was built under Khufu's reign. Now, just to give you a perspective what it would have taken to build such a monumental structure in such a short time, it's basically carving, transporting, and lifting and placing in position one block every 4.5 minutes. Now, we're talking about some of them having to go up 47 stories. And this is if you basically do not take a single day off, so yes, no holidays, and if you were to work 24 hours a day for 20 years. That is what it would have taken to build that pyramid according to the way that Egyptologists have come to understand the Great Pyramid of Giza. But that's not the only fact that makes this behemoth of a monument so incomprehensible. To have the sides of the pyramid actually go up 47 stories and meet in such a perfect accuracy so as to fit a capstone, or what some would call pyramidium, you would actually have to take into account Earth's curvature at its foundation. That's how accurate they would have had to be. And that's not even talking about the blocks themselves. Now, most Egyptologists will agree that the Great Pyramid of Giza was likely built around the same time as the Sphinx. Robert Schoch believes that the weathering of the Sphinx means that it must have been at least 10,000, some would even put it 20,000 years old. So the question remains, was the Great Pyramid of Giza really built by the Egyptians? I know. If it wasn't the Egyptians, then who would it be? Little green man? I can see Egyptologists already calling me a pyramidiot as I say this.
This is a response from Zaya Hawass to the millionaire, the American millionaire, Elon Musk. What you said about the pyramids is completely hallucination. The pyramid built by Egyptians. All the tombs around the Great Pyramid mention Khufu Pyramid and the king himself. And also inside the Great Pyramid, there is inscriptions telling us about the workmen and the gangs who built the pyramids. I found the tombs of the pyramid builders that tells everyone that the builders of the pyramid were Egyptians and they were not slaves. The pyramid was a national project of the whole nation.
But the truth is, there are so many other interesting facts that if it was just the intro by itself, I certainly would not be able to create an episode. So what I decided to do is bring some cheat sheets with me. I know it's a lot of information. I'm not going to be able to memorize all of this, but I wanted to go over some really interesting facts that kind of disputes the idea that the Egyptians may have actually built the Great Pyramid of Giza. For one, the Great Pyramid of Giza incorporates pi. Now, to some, this may not be a big deal, but let me explain what's happening here. The dimensions of the Great Pyramid of Giza is that it's 280 cubits high, 440 cubits at its base. So if you were to actually get the perimeter of the Great Pyramid of Giza, which is 1,760 cubits, and you were to, let's say, draw a giant circle around the Great Pyramid of Giza so that the circle's circumference actually equals the base of the pyramid, well, the radius of the circle would essentially be the exact height of the pyramid, or I should say nearly exact height. So if you were to take 280, replace it with the radius, and basically make pi into the variable that we're looking for, well, that would be 2 pi 280 equals 1760. Pi would essentially equal 1760 divided by 560, which equals 3.14285. The actual pi is 3.14159. That is 4,000th of a percent of accuracy that the Egyptians had. Now, here's what's so mysterious about this. There is a mathematical book called the Rhind Papyrus, which was not written until 1,000 years later, around 1605 BC. Now, according to the Rhind Papyrus, and these are some claims that Egyptologists have made, that perhaps the Egyptians knew about pi. The only problem is that this mathematical book calculated, if you're using this calculation to infer that the Egyptians did indeed know pi, it comes out to 3.1605, which is 0.06% off. Not bad. But the question still lingers. Why is it a book that was written 1,000 years after the Great Pyramid of Giza was constructed would have a pi value that was, I guess, close to 10 times less accurate? I don't know, it doesn't really seem to make sense to me that something that would be so much younger would have a less accurate scale to the actual pi value. But moving further, it's not just pi that the Great Pyramid of Giza was constructed around. It was also the golden ratio that the pyramids seems to reflect in all sorts of ways. For example, if you're to take this side, and the side can be calculated by the Pythagorean theorem, if you take 280 squared plus 440 squared equals the side squared, well, the side comes out to 356.089. So if you're to take the side divided by the height of the pyramid, 356.089 divided by 280, that equals 1.272. Now, if you don't recognize that number, it's okay, I didn't recognize it either. But that is the square root of the golden ratio. Now, if you're to take the height of the pyramid, 280, and then divide it by half of the base, which equates to 220 cubits, well, that's also 1.272, the square root of the golden ratio. Now, if you're to take the side, 356.089, divided by the height, 280, well, that equals the golden ratio, 1.618. Now, if you're to take the base and divide it by the side, 440 divided by 356.089 cubits, that equals 1.2356. Okay, that number doesn't really have anything to do with the golden ratio, but the importance of it, I didn't actually realize until much later. So I'm going to go ahead and leave that number at the bottom of the screen so that you remember it. And let's get into a few other interesting facts. It happens that if you're to go to the mysterious Nazca Lines, those petroglyphs, those lines that span tens of miles, that basically cuts across the mountains, and that can only be seen from the sky, if you're to go to the Nazca Plateau and essentially go to Egypt, that would take you to 12,369 kilometers. Now, what's so interesting about that number is that it's almost exactly the distance of the Great Pyramid of Giza, which is probably the most relevant pyramid in all of Egyptology. It's almost the exact same distance to the Pyramid of the Sun in Teotihuacan, Mexico, which is probably one of their most important pyramids in all of Aztec culture. So just to rewind a little bit, the distance from the pyramid in Mexico to the pyramid in Giza happens to be the same distance as the Pyramid of Giza to the Nazca Plateau. Now you might be asking, okay, so what? You see petroglyphs in the sky. What's so important about Nazca? Well, if you were to actually drill in the bottom of Nazca and essentially drill a hole to the other side of Earth, you would end up very close to Angkor Wat and Puerto Rivera, which are only about 50 kilometers apart. So these are two of the most important temples, monuments in Cambodia. So you might be thinking, okay, this guy is just pulling my string. But okay, check this out. This information comes from a documentary called The Revelations of Pyramid, but it's actually really astonishing information, and I had to double check on my own Google Maps, and I'll go ahead and show it to you in the screen in the back so that you can see what's happening. Let's say we start at the Easter Island with those mysterious statues that are looking into the sky. You know, kind of like how Nazca Lines, you can't see it from anywhere else but the sky. And if you were to take that line and start it at Easter Island, that line would then cross the Paracas Chandelier, the Nazca Lines, then would actually hit Machu Picchu and the Paratori Pyramids. After crossing the Atlantic Ocean, that same line would hit the Tassili Niger Desert, which has all kinds of interesting archaeology. It's an episode we're going to do later. It goes over the Siwa Oasis, which is one of the most important sites in Egypt, the Giza Plateau, and the incredible desert city of Petra in Jordan, where you see those amazing carvings of some of them with doors that look like only giants could enter. Then you go to the city of Ur in Iraq, which is said to be the city embodied by the gods. It's also where they found those strange reptilian statues. The ones that some archaeologists would have deemed to be Anunnaki. And that same exact line goes through Persepolis, Iran, with all those Babylonian motifs, Mohenjo-daro in Pakistan, Khajuraho in India, Sukhothai in Thailand, Angkor Wat in Cambodia, and also Priya Vihara, and ends up back at Easter Island. Is that a coincidence, ladies and gentlemen? I don't know. That seems like an incredible coincidence that all these amazing cities, a lot of them which, by the way, create reptilian-looking statues. I mean, look at the ones that you see in Angkor Wat. Look at the ones that you see in Sukhothai with the Nagas. It's very strange, right? So if not reptilians, let's just call it dragons for now, just for the sake of being somewhat skeptical. You know, it's hard to be skeptical when you see a line like that. And then when you realize that Nazca is the same distance to the Egyptian pyramid as it is to Teotihuacan, but here's where things get really, really creepy. So if you're to start at Nazca again and actually make a line all the way to Egypt, well, that, as we said earlier, equals 12,369 kilometers. Now let's say that from that line you were to create a North Pole. Another way of thinking is if you were to go perpendicular from Nazca and just go straight up, and then you're to go to perpendicular from Egypt and go straight up, at a certain point those lines are going to meet at the very peak of what would be a North Pole if that line was an equator. Well, that distance, which happens to equal the quarter distance of Earth's circumference, 12,369 divided by 10,010 kilometers equals, drumroll, ladies and gentlemen, exactly 1.2356. Now you see why I kept that number for you, ladies and gentlemen. So what I'm trying to say is the Great Pyramid of Giza in almost every relationship somehow denotes the golden ratio, but in the one time that it does not denote the golden ratio, it denotes the exact proportions of it to Nazca Lines and then a quarter of the circumference of Earth, which another way of thinking is half of the distance from Nazca to Angkor Wat, or half of the distance of Mohenjo-daro to Easter Island. Oh yeah, I forgot to tell you that. Mohenjo-daro also happens to be in the opposite side of the Earth as Easter Island, let alone be in the same line, which is, I don't know how that can happen coincidentally. I think that denotes some kind of civilization, some kind of culture that was not just creating pyramids in Egypt, but all over the world. It might explain why there was a common motif with the pyramids with almost every culture of the world, including China, by the way. We have, I think just yesterday, we discovered 12, 13 pyramids in China. A lot of them actually wider than the Great Pyramid of Giza, if you can believe that. What is also kind of interesting is if you're to go from Nazca all the way to Angkor Wat, which is basically halfway around the world, well, that equals 20,020 kilometers. If you were to take that number and divide it by the distance of Nazca in Egypt, the distance we just used for the other ratio, 12,369 kilometers, well, that approximates very close to the golden ratio. And we're talking about the Nazca Plateau. I don't know where to start that number in the Nazca Plateau. So I take that as well within the range of error. I think it's absolutely amazing that all these proportions seem to be popping up, not just with the Great Pyramid of Giza itself, which took incredible engineering skills to build, but these other monuments, including the most important pyramid in the entire Aztec Empire. So, I mean, once again, I'm going to ask, could the Egyptians have done all of that? Could they have influenced all these different cultures to make all these monuments, not just within the same line of one another, but also behave in the proportions that the Great Pyramid of Giza behaves? Because if you're to take that base, the line from Nazca to Egypt, and you're to take those lines from the North Pole, well, that's basically a section of the Great Pyramid of Giza. So I'm going to ask again, was it even feasible? Is it even possible that the Egyptians could have made the Great Pyramid of Giza given the fact that there's no hieroglyphs that were ever discovered in the pyramid, given the fact that it might be 10,000 years old at least, meaning it's around the age of the Sphinx. And there's one other thing that when I made this episode, it wasn't mentioned in the revelation of the pyramids. In fact, I haven't seen it mentioned anywhere, but I found pretty incredible. About a year ago, this channel made a series of episodes talking about the Atlantis Empire. And we were actually going off this idea that Jimmy of Bright Insight had initially put out on the internet. I think he took it from a few other documentaries. But the point is, maybe, just maybe, Atlantis was actually in Africa. And what was thought to be the big circle that Plato so elegantly described, perhaps that is what we now call the Eye of the Sahara. And for the people who saw those episodes, there was incredible things that we discovered around the area. And if you're to flood that area, it looks exactly like Atlantis would have thought to have looked like, according to ancient descriptions. Now, here's what I found so amazing. The Eye of the Sahara is also in the boundary of the lines. Just a coincidence? I don't know, ladies and gentlemen. I'm starting to think that Little Green Man doesn't sound so far-fetched after all. Anyways, that is the episode for today. On the next episode, we're going to be going over why the Great Pyramid of Giza actually denotes the speed of light, not just in one way, but in two different ways. So please stay tuned for the next episode, and thank you so much for following Second Earth. This is Felipe speaking, signing out.